Welcome to a special edition of Homegrown Tales, featuring a Q&A session with Arkansas native Harry Thomason, producer of movies and TV shows including Designing Women and Evening Shade. Thomason hails from Hampton, Arkansas, and was a coach and teacher at McClellan High School in Little Rock. He began his film career producing campaign commercials for Arkansas politicians, and then writing and producing movies including A Shining Season and TV shows including The Fall Guy and the miniseries The Blue and the Gray. In 1983, he founded Mozart Productions with his wife, Linda Bloodworth Thomason. They're best known for their television series Designing Women, Evening Shade, and Hearts of Fire. The following Q&A session was hosted by Homegrown Tales producers Zeek Taylor and Sandra Spotts, August 7th, 2024, at Brews, Two Piney Spring in Eureka Springs. We begin with Harry Thomason speaking about his acclaimed television miniseries, The Blue and the Gray.
Columbia put me on the team to shoot The Blue and the Gray. And they sent us all over the country scouting. And there was not a place that was suitable. You know, they had either jived up the battlegrounds or this or that. Then I made a deal. They said, we're ready to offer you a full-time deal if you'll go to work for Sony full-time or Columbia. And I said, yes, I will, but there's one thing I have to have. I'll miss Little Rock in Arkansas, so I'm going to have to go home every weekend, and you guys have to pay for my flight home on Thursday night or Friday night and pay me back on Monday. And they did that for 2 years, and so that's how I became a 3 million miler for American Airlines. And so I came home and I drove up here. I drove to Eureka Springs and I spent the weekend driving around this part of the country. And on Monday I went back out there and I went in to see the producer and the superintendent of everything. And he's the only one, he could kill anybody with just a single whack. I mean, because he had so much power, and I said, Seymour, this guy's name was Seymour Friedman. He was a Britishman and he had been an ace in World War II, he's a Spitfire pilot. And I said, Seymour, I went home this weekend, I took some Polaroids. This is the only place I believe we could shoot this. I showed him Polaroids of this town, of Fayetteville, some of the other little towns around in the forest and the field. And he said, he looked at it a while and then he said, Harry, you haven't been here long. But so far it's gone well. But I'm going to tell you, said, if I'll let you go to Arkansas and shoot, and it goes wrong, you will never work in this town again. I mean, and when he said it had meaning, because that was true. And so I said, okay. And we came to Fayetteville and we shot it, and he'd fly in on the Columbia plane about every other week and look at it, and forever after that, when I'd be walking down the hall at Columbia, I'd hear him shout from his office in that British accent, Harry, when you go get another picture, we can shoot in Arkansas. So he loved all the little restaurants in Fayetteville and around. And I walk in Fayetteville one morning to our production offices in the hotel over there, and they called from the set, because it was about 6 in the morning and I'd been up late, and said, you got to come out here. I said, why? I said, well, Rip Torn is threatening to kill the art director. And I said, okay, I'll be out there. And I went in and I said, Rip, what are you doing? And he says, I'm going to kill him if he makes me do this. See this jacket? He was playing U.S. Grant. Said, see this jacket? It has 3 gold buttons on it. His jacket had 4 golden buckets on it, and I'm not wearing this jacket and making a disgrace of myself. And so I thought about it and I said, Rip, will you go with whatever the Smithsonian tells us? And he said, yeah, you get the Smithsonian on the phone and I'll talk. And so I called. It took a little while to finally get the right person on the phone. And I put him on with Rip. I said, Rip, we had him on the speakerphone. You asked the question. And he said, did Grant's button have 3 or the dress jacket have 3 or 4 buttons? And the guy said, oh, well, that's easy. It's right here on display right in the museum now. I'll go count them. And he walked down to the thing and he said, he's got 3 buttons. Like his always got. And so Rip said, here, I know you're going to take my gun. So anyway, and so we became a real fan. And a couple of years later, though, there's a lot of personnel changes, and a new guy comes in at present. That's a good that's a typical New Yorker, but he wasn't bad, but he fired me. I had for you a long time. he fired me. And then I'm getting to the end of the story. I won't cover the rest. That'll be the next book. And they fire me, and they say, we're sorry, Harry, we just can't continue to pay for you to do that, and so forth. And so I said, well, I understand. It's okay, and I appreciate the work you've given me. And I walk out, and about an hour later, I get a call. And it's from some guys at Fox Pictures that used to be at Columbia, and they knew when I was there and everything, said, Harry, I don't know how much I was making at Columbia, but it was pretty good. But they said, we want you to come over here. We've got a television show that's out of control and that we need to do something about. And I think you're the only one that can do it. And it was the two presidents of Fox said. And they said, come over and talk about it. And so we talked about it, and I said, you guys know I've been fired. He said, yeah, we told them to fire you so we could get it. That's the way things work in Hollywood. I said, okay. And I said, they said, now what are you going to want to do this? I said, you got to get to the bottom of this. We think there are thieves involved. There are people taking money. And this show is running $1 million an episode over what shows like this run. And we've got to stop it. And they said, we want you to come here. You spend a couple of weeks researching it, and then we'll make whatever movie we have to make. But how much do you want? And so I didn't say anything, and I said, well, I don't want to go to work for the same amount of money I work with at Sony. And so they said, okay, we'll triple it, okay? Now let's get that over. And so they did, and I made good money at Fox, and went over there and was there, and I took one of the guy who's president of another studio now in England, and he was an accountant, and a guy named John Janis, and I took him over there, and they gave us a secret office. And we roamed around all day long, and we would just study them on the set, and then John would get all the accounting and do it, and we found that there were 17 of the crew members. They were pretty low down, but they had all these ways to scam it, and they were scamming it for about close to $1 million an episode, really. And so then after 3 weeks, we said, okay, we're ready to go, and we got names. And there was a girl sitting in this room that I first met then. And she's a friend, Sandra Clark, right here from Dallas, and has friends here and here a lot. And it's 8 o'clock in the morning when we walk into the Sony offices, and you may not remember this, Sandra. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm always conscious about it. And I said, and John Janis was with me, and we said, where are the producer's offices? I did. And Cassandra said, well, they're right back there, but they're not here. And I, as a smart ass, said, yes, we are. And we'll show us back to the office. And she did. And we handed the staff a list of 17 people we needed to fire and, and avoid union problems. And we did every one of them. And the show went down. And it was Lee Majors and what's that show, Cassandra? Fall Guy, which just a movie came out, and I got a new jacket from them that had not these same guys, but they sent me a silk jacket that had Fall Guy on the back. But this movie didn't resemble the series very much. And so that's Cassandra stayed with us for a long time, and then when I married my wife and we went back to Columbia, Cassandra became a writer and wrote on some of our shows like Designing Women. Yeah, Designing Women and so forth. And then now she's in Dallas and writes biographies, right? Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's how I got to Hollywood. But it's all based on the fact that we wanted people to think about Arkansas and all the southern states differently, and that was part that was mentioned that when the WGA gave her the award, they mentioned that she had changed the way the people felt, and so we partly accomplished our mission. So
in this next segment, Thomason speaks about producing the 1979 movie A Shining Season.
I flew to LAX, and so we decided on Sony after 2 days, and so on Friday morning, last day of the week, we went back to Sony to make a deal. It was raining, thundering and lightning like you never see it in LA, And we drive over the hill to Columbia Studios, and we walk in this glass building. It's solid glass on each side. And upstairs, that's where the business attorney's office are. And we went up, and we walked in, and Joe said, well, you know what we're here for, guys. And so they handed me a letter, and it said what I was going to do. I was going to take producer credit, be named as the producer on the film, but they were going to have to assign a couple more people to me and this and that. And Joe looked at me, and I don't know what he was thinking, but I said, I'm not going to do that. And they said, why? I want you to do it. We're offering you $25,000, and everything. And I said, because I'm not going to just be named the producer. If I'm not the producer, I don't want to do it, And so they said, well, we're going to have to go downstairs and talk to business affairs about this and everything else. So they went, they said, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. And so I told Joe Horchak, I said, let's go. And we started walking down that long glass hallway with all the thunder and the lightning. And we walk out into the rain, and he's holding his briefcase over his head, and I'm holding nothing. I didn't, and he kept telling me we were walking down the stairs. So the first floor, he said, they'll be back. Don't worry. They'll call before we get outside. And we got to the door. No call. And he said, that's funny. I've never seen that happen. That's never happened to me, And so we walk out into this rainstorm. It's a rainstorm. And he gets to the driver's side of the car and opens the door, and I get to the other side. And then he looks back and he says, look. And there was one I'm on the porch waving for it to come back in. So we went back through, and they said, hey, we don't usually do this, but we're going to do it this time. We're going to, because you have Joe Horchak as an attorney and everything, we're going to trust you, and you're producing it too. And then they said, just sign it. And I signed the letter of intent, And then they said, okay, so we're done, and we appreciate you guys coming by, and we'll get started on this thing. And so I said, okay, but there's one other thing. It says in this letter that upon signing the agreement, I get $25,000, And they said, Harry, this company is owned by Coca-Cola right now. They write the checks in New York, and there's no way you're going to get the money today. And I said, Joe, and before he could get up, they said, okay, we're going to go back downstairs and talk to them, but I'm telling you, they're not going to agree to this, And they went downstairs, and they were down there a long time, and then they walked back upstairs into the room, and this guy held up a check, and he said, Harry, I want you to see this. And I looked at it, and it was a counter check, like you used to go in the bank office and just pull a check off and fill in everything, and the bank would cash it, So it's a counter check, and the people in New York wanted me to tell you this is the first time Coca-Cola has written a counter check since 1927. And so I said, well, thank them for me, would you, And so then they wanted me to come back out and start, and I did let them assign two line producers that had experience in the business, and they worked for something, and that was fine as long as I had the final say, and I agreed to that. But then came back out, they wanted to talk about who we were going to get as writers. So we went to Columbia, and then we all went back over to CBS, because CBS had expressed an interest in buying it, and they wanted to know who's going to write the script. So we walk in, and this guy who was head of this movie department at CBS then, he'd been a college professor at Harvard, and he was a real big guy, and he said, you guys sent me a list of 10 writers, and I've been through them all. I didn't know them. I mean, really, I didn't know them. And he said, and I can tell you, not a one of these guys can write this script the way it ought to be written. And so the two guys with me from Sony Columbia's now Sony, but Columbia, they were arguing, well, we could find some other, and they told me, said, it'll be quiet, since you don't know how all this works. If you just listen to us and learn, it'll be okay. So I tried to stay quiet, but then I'd had enough, and I just because I'd been coaching a teacher, I just raised my hand, you know. And the guy said, what would you do? Harry, what do you want to say? And under the table, I just felt knees going back and forth against mine, don't say anything. I said, I think I can get a friend of mine to write this script. And then they just went, oh, the guy's from Sony. And he said, who? And I said, Bill Harrison. And he said, Bill Harrison, the head of University of Arkansas writing department, that wrote one of those big movies I've forgotten, and had all these famous books and won a Pulitzer Prize. And I said, yeah. I said, I can go in there and call him, and I believe he'll write it, you know. And he said, see that door? That's our office, and you go in there and you call him right now. And if he says he's going to write it, not only are we going to buy the script, we're guaranteeing production on it. And so I go back in the office and I call Bill in Fayetteville at home, and he wasn't in class, and he said, oh, of course I'll write it, Harry. I'll do that in 3 days, you know. And I went back in and I said, well, he's agreed to write it. He said, then you've got a deal, you know, you're producing it, it's going to be made and everything, and that's exactly what happened. And we won some pretty big awards. That was one of my first seasons as a producer.
And the title was?
A Shining Season.
I want to know how you met Bill Clinton.
Oh, I met Bill Clinton because my brother's a retired doctor in Little Rock, and when he was teaching biology at Hot Springs High School, he called me around Thanksgiving. I was living in Little Rock, and he said, hey, I want to bring this guy to your house for Thanksgiving lunch, if that's okay, a Thanksgiving dinner. And, you know, and I said, well, sure. I said, who is he? He said, well, I just want you to meet him because I think he's going to be president someday. And I said, Danny, are you crazy? There's a guy that you meet at Shoney's every night around midnight. You guys get a midnight meal, and he's going off to college, and you think he's going to be president? And he said, I do. So we have Thanksgiving dinner, and Danny drives back to Hot Springs after that, and it gets real late, and he calls me, and he said, okay, what do you think? And I said, I think he's going to be president. And so we were friends. That was 1965 or 6, and we've been, and the Clintons, him and I have been friends ever since, you know. And the problem about, if you don't stop it.
No stopping.
But it was run, I mean, now there's some guy writing a history book that the reason, well, we were very mistreated in Washington, you know. But as it turns out, I mean, what everybody thinks now, we were the first, it was heavy on the film and TV side for Clinton than it had ever been. And so, yeah, they were all after us and wished we were dead and everything else. But it was good. We loved it.
Okay, does anyone have a question for Harry?
So as a gay man, growing up, Designing Women was a really important show because it represented a lot of issues that nobody was addressing except for you. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think my wife was much braver than I was. I'm not sure I would have done, but she didn't care, you know. And the censors would come, oh, you can't say that and you can't do that on television. And she'd just say, it's okay, because that's the one good thing she did. She was always so far behind that the script that we shot on Thursday night was the script she'd written on Sunday. And so it was too late by the time they got in there. We said, we've already rehearsed it, we've done, and they'd find a way to make it work because they wanted to make it work, but they couldn't. And that's what bothers me about modern network television. I don't think the networks will last because a lot of the shows we made about AIDS, about gay people, about everything, couldn't, you'd be said, no, don't do that today. I mean, I worry that we're not as protected today as we were back then, you know, on things that challenge everybody to look at something a different way. You know, we're glad that we did it, you know.
Can you give us, like, just a great Designing Women story where you were directing these amazing women?
You know, it's hard. We had 130 shows or so, and it's hard for me to divorce myself from the ones I directed and the ones I didn't direct.
But did you produce all of them?
I'm sorry?
Were you a producer on?
Yeah, all of them, yeah. And I directed about 30 of them, and I like the one where all of them were together at the cabin and they all talked about men and women all weekend long. That was actually one of my favorites, you know, and then I directed the AIDS show, which was, of course, based on Linda's mother, that she got transfused AIDS, and we went through it all, you know. The hospitals didn't want her there, but we had one doctor who is still my doctor today, and he'd been the first person with polio to go through medical school, and he lived in an iron lung most of his life. And every night he was the only one that was really on our side to start with. And every night it was such a relief to hear those crutches of his coming down the hall, you know, because we were always his last visit of the night. And so there were a lot of things like that, you know.
Can you tell a good Burt Reynolds story? I know you got one.
Yeah, I can tell a good Burt Reynolds story. And Burt and I ended up friends on all of this, but Burt had let's say he had an explosive temper. And when we hired him, people said, when he decided to come to work for us, instead of there was some other studio, they said, "Oh, you don't know what you've done." You know, that's like, you know, you picked the wrong. But he had a fiery temper and everything, and so not long into the series, well, I had sort of fisticuffs with him early, but that was, you know, and we were down on the floor. We were in his office, and I heard he had all the writers, which were all male except Melinda on that show, in his office threatening them, and I went up and he was threatening them, and I said, "Burt, don't do that." And he jumped over the desk and lunged at me with his fist, and I just put him in an embrace and held him and took him down to the floor, and all the writers sort of crawled and ran out of the room and just left the two of them. And finally Burt just looked at me and I looked at him. We both started laughing so hard we had tears in our eyes, and that was it, you know. And then later in the series where it got, Burt had a few more problems. Somebody was shooting Evening Shade on that stage, and I was shooting Hearts of Fire with our good friend Margie Post and John Ritter. Somebody came over and said, "Harry, you've got to come over here." Oh, and Burt's assistant, who was a former state policeman in Florida, and who was a really good guy, played college football and everything, and Burt loved him because Burt loved all. And he sent somebody over to ask Linda to sort of, because it had been sort of rough between them, and Linda just sort of ignored him and wanted to make things up, and so he talked Linda into coming over to the stage, just putting her arm around Burt, and when she did, he just went crazy, and he started tearing up the set with the chair. He was just smashing it in and everything, and everybody over there was panicked, and then somebody came over. We were to the stage next door, so they just had to run 50 feet to come in and tell me, "Here, you've got to come over here. You know Burt's trying to kill Linda." And so I said, "Okay," and John and Margie said, "Go, we're good with it," you know. And so I walk over there and I walk in the stage door, but then there were curtains that bound everything off. And Charlie Durning, who I dearly loved, and you know, and he caught me with his arm and he said, "Harry, don't go in there." I said, "Why?" He's beating up Linda, you know. And he said, "Come here, look." And he took me up to the curtain and pulled back the curtain. And there was Burt lying on the floor crying, and Linda was standing over him saying, "You're just ungrateful, you're not well-mannered, and you've got to change this stuff." And he was crying and crying. And so I said, "Okay, I'm going back to work, Charlie. If there's any trouble, let me know." You know? But Charlie Durning was one of the most amazing guys. He didn't talk about this till Evening Shade, and then he became the speaker for VA Day and a lot of big days like that for all the armed forces and everything. But Charlie went ashore. I mean, he was everywhere. He was in the Pacific in World War II. He was at Normandy. And when he went to Normandy, he continued that battle as they battled in the snow and everything after a few weeks, and they were further inland. And that's when the German troops lined up 50 American soldiers. I believe it was 50 that shot and killed them all. What was the what?
Battle of the Bulge.
That's right. And so Charlie was in that group, and they shot him and shot the other guy, and they fell to the ground. And Charlie said they laid there because the sun was, it was just snowing lightly and a lot of light when it happened, and then it gets darker and darker. Snow falls harder and harder. And then he hears this dead guy beside him say, "What, are we just going to lie here all night, or are we going to get up and run?" And he and Charlie Durning, I think 60 Minutes did a piece about it, a venture or somebody. He and Charlie Durning Charlie said, "Go," and they both got up at the same instant and ran into the woods. And the Germans, it was too late. They shot at him, but he was ineffective then, and they made it back to their own lines. And then Charlie went directly from there to the Eastern Wars in the Philippines and elsewhere. He was just such a great guy. Yeah. But Bert and I, we all ended up friends. We didn't take it, but that's just the way you had to handle it. But.
Well, I mentioned that I grew up in Wayland Holyfield. He was in my class for grammar school, high school, and everything. You got a Wayland Holyfield story for me? Well,
other than the one I talked to Wayland quite often up until he died. Though I hadn't talked to him in months before, and I hate that, but because I wasn't expecting it, but he was just one of the nicest guys I've ever been around. Just like Fred Smith and like Wayland. They all we all got to do what we wanted. And it's funny, we were in that little group every Monday morning begging. So,
another question?
I would like to tell.
Okay. No, never mind.
Ask yourself a
question. Short.
Please.
Because I was fired at Columbia, and then when I married Linda, they had to hire me back because they knew they'd lose Linda to Fox. I want to give her credit here. But the real way I got back into Fox's good graces is this same Seymour Freeman, who I loved till he died at the age of 100. We'd have, and a couple of other guys that were in the bit, we'd have lunch with him once a month for years after he retired. I just loved him so. And so they called a meeting at all the studios, and this was in about 1981, I think. And the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association, had made this rule that was really going to hurt the studios' money in their participation and everything. So all the studios were upset about it. But Valenti, who was head of the MPAA, they had changed this thing. And so they had a meeting. They asked all of us, if you know any way you can change this, you've got to let us know. You call somebody, do something, or the studios are all going to go bankrupt, And they convinced us they weren't kidding. And so at the end of the meeting, I raised my hand and I said, there were about 100 of us in there, and I raised my hand and I said, Seymour, I may know somebody I can talk to that might could help. And of course, I was still the country bumpkin to him anyway, but he said, well, that's good, Harry, talk to him, and went on the next questions. And so as soon as the meeting was over, I went to my office, I called the MPAA, and I asked for Victor Nutt. And Victor Nutt was a participant, and another was childhood sores, though I didn't put him in the story. And Victor Nutt was a lawyer for the MPAA. And I went through it, and I said, Victor, as a boy from Hampton, we know. And he says, Harry, I've been hating that rule since they put it in place, and I'm going to go right now to Jack Valenti's office and say, get it out, or we're going to cause the studios to go under. And he called me back in about 45 minutes, and he said, it's out. You don't have to worry about it. And so I was walking down the hall, and I was walking past Seymour Freeman's office, and he looked up from his desk. He was 2 offices back, but he could see me. And he looked at me, and I said, Seymour, I took care of that little problem and walked on. I got a big raise the next week. If I just tell one more, Donna,
Absolutely.
Donna, are you going to hit me if I tell one more? The relatives control each other in our family.
Yeah, they do. Those Thomasons.
But Victor Lee Nutt was watching from a hillside, and in another event when Charlie Pierce and Woody Harrell went on, Generations Bank in Fayetteville and around. That was founded by my friend Woody Harrell. Well, it was based on his grandfather's bank in Hampton that was robbed by Bonnie and Clyde when they were alive. But now it's generations, and they're all over. They're in a bunch of states now. And but we were out with our BB guns, and we played like it was World War II, because I remember the last part of World War II, as a little tiny kid, and we dug a foxhole, and all of a sudden there's a gunshot, and dirt blows up all around us, and and then while we're looking back, see this guy with a gun and a telescope, and he's firing at us. Well, he's not firing, he's laughing. He's firing, and it hits by, and we're digging that hole deeper, trying to get under it, And I see Victor Lee over there, and then he leaves, and he was a couple of years older than we were, and but then Sheriff Doyle Duncan, the sheriff, that's the only sheriff I ever knew. I mean, Doyle Duncan, every sheriff was Doyle Duncan to me. He was had a lot of swagger, 10-gallon hat and everything. And while we're looking up out of the hole, just as his car roars up and he jumps out, and he doesn't have a gun and shoots the guy. O.B. Johnson, who became a successful guy too, he doesn't have a gun to shoot O.B. He's got a razor strap, and he hits the guy so hard it raises him off the ground. And he gets up and he hits him several more times. Said, "Now you take that gun of yours and you go home and you park it there, and don't you ever shoot at anybody again." He never shot at anybody again, and he became a successful guy. So maybe we ought to look at the way we enforce law enforcement sometimes.
You've been listening to a special Q&A session with Harry Thomason, held August 7th, 2024 at Brews, 2 Piney Spring in Eureka Springs. Read stories from Thomason's childhood and early career in his book Brother Dog, Southern Tales and Hollywood Adventures, available for purchase on Amazon. And join us again next time for more Homegrown Tales.